Vision. Following clues left by our ancestors, we unbury the past to reveal a knowledge of unfathomable value, putting us just a little closer to our own true birthrights. From the secret history of a possible bloodline of Jesus Christ, the secret history of America's founders, to the secret history of extraterrestrial interaction on our planet, here to bring light to the night. Your host for Night Vision Radio, Renee Barnett.
Everyone, welcome back to Night Vision, or if this is your first time, welcome to Night Vision. So happy to have you here. It's great to be here once again with all of you. And I have a special show planned for tonight. You know, I'm just going to go into a book that really sparked a huge controversy around the world in 1982. Some of you may have already guessed that the name of this book is Holy Blood, Holy Grail, written by the authors Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln, all of whom have left this plane. And so this is not only a review of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, but also a tribute to those three, because once this book hit the news, it was dynamite. I can even remember seeing some of the news programs about it and whether or not it was, you know, too heretical and should it even be out there in the public, because it addressed ideas that, or at least broached ideas that sort of ran counter to popular or to traditional church doctrine, such as looking at the idea of possibility of a marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and the idea that Mary Magdalene was actually quite an important person and not this prostitute, as even the Catholic Church, I believe it was 1969, acknowledged it. They got that story wrong. The woman by the well, the prostitute by the well, was not Mary Magdalene. But even so, people still to this day refer to her that way. And I remember it was very striking to me to see this sort of restoration of the image of Mary Magdalene, because as a young girl, a young woman, it was very meaningful because, you know, I grew up in a time, and it's still this way to a large extent, where, you know, it's just kind of better to be a boy. It's kind of hard to get ahead if you're a girl. It's hard to make as much money, even for the same work, that sort of thing. It seemed like the boys would get more recognition in school and things like that. But we just accepted it because that's just sort of the way things were. But with this revelation, to me personally, in that book, I started thinking, hey, wait a minute. Maybe that's not the way things should be. And I'd always felt like, hey, I'm smarter than him. Why is he getting all the praise and things like that? And I wasn't the only girl that felt that way. So anyhow, I'm getting off on a tangent about my own personal experience with Holy Blood, Holy Grail. But there have been many, many, many people who have their own stories, and many who have been led to make that trip to the tiny hilltop village of Rennes-le-Château, which is very much featured in the book, and try to, you know, solve the mystery, find the treasure, whatever it is, get the answers. And people are still doing that to this day. Of course, we know, you know, with the publication of the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown and the subsequent film that came out, it brought a renewed interest in the area, in that area of studies, you know, Rennes research. We call ourselves Rennies, those people who are really involved in this research and very much interested in it. So I've got a couple of really good Rennies with me this evening. Of course, first of all is our wonderful historian, James Martin, who is with us regularly and who, unbeknownst to me, had just recently reread Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And our guest tonight is another Rennie researcher and author. And he contacted me this week, and we were chatting as we do. And he mentioned, I'm just rereading Holy Blood, Holy Grail after all this time. And I'm finding things that I just did not see before because I had not been, as steeped in that research up until this time. So now having this bigger body of knowledge, going back and looking at it, things might look a little bit different to a lot of those of us. We're going to discuss those ideas that were first put out, and also some of the nuggets that our guest tonight has come up with that mean something more to him now than they did. So I'm going to bring on our wonderful guest, author Court Lindahl, and he is joining us now from Northern California. Hey, Court.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's going to be a great conversation here this evening.
Well, I've been wanting to get the two of you, you and James, together to go over some of your mutual, research, or your research that has a lot of crossover. I'm not suggesting that you would totally agree on everything, but I love the fact that you're both delving into the records, the archives, the research, and it's actually yielding information that, whether it may be new information to a lot of people, or it may be information that now has more meaning. So welcome to both of you. And James, it's always good to have you with me, of course, because I rely heavily on your big brain, as everyone knows.
Thanks for having us. And when it comes to new research, is this being revealed at this time for a reason, or has it been buried for so long? And if so, why? There's lots of very interesting things cropping up. Really, in the past couple of years, it's quite exciting, really, to start look at things with a new set of eyes, perhaps, and re-examine things that have come by before.
Absolutely. Yes. I love doing that because it does mean something different, once you've been involved in the subject matter for a while. So, Court, why did you decide to pick that book up again and slog through it? Because I'm going to tell you right now, it's not an easy read. It is not an easy read, but it's full of nuggets. Well, it's,
all right. Well, I've been eating it up.
Honor to the authors.
To read it every day. I've been checking it out, to one degree or another, and I'm almost done with it again. And as you said at first, that reading that book and even seeing your movie Bloodline kind of inspired me to look into all of this more and see what you can prove to yourself or not. And the book is really factual and full of good sources and names and people and places that I had forgotten were even mentioned in the book. That as I went through my research in the interim, all of these subject matters came up, like the origins of the Arcadian theme, for instance, that they cover in the book. I found a few differences in what I found along the way. For example, the book kind of emphasizes this Merovingian connection to the men who created the Knights Templar, and which I'm not saying isn't true at all, but what I found was another avenue of Merovingian intermarriage with Byzantine nobility. And this is all apparent in the history of Ravenna, Italy, for example, where you have, even the one of the sources of the bloodline as associated with the Knights Templar was referred to as Ursus, for example. In Ravenna, we have Basilica Ursiana that refers to the same term. When I researched the genealogy of people like Emperor Arcadius and the propensity to name some of the women Arcadia in the royal household, that I then looked in to see how they were actually related to Merovingian women. And this, I think, was valued by them as a kind of a cloistered secret as well. That applies to all of the reasons that people are interested in Merovingians, the possible links to Mary Magdalene, to Christ himself, possibly. And so it was interesting to see this in an early Christian context in relation to Byzantine values in Ravenna. And even some of the architecture there, we have the story of the Visigoths, who are related to the region of Rennes-le-Château when it was known as Septimania, and the theories that even the temple treasure were brought there, and that could be one of the sources of several treasure legends or several possible treasures in that area of France is amazing. There's lots of different reasons that people could think something of value was hidden there, even beyond a historical secret like the bloodline.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't know if you're each familiar with Sandy Hamlet, who has a website called Rhodesium online. And several years ago, oh my goodness, I'm trying to think of when that was, she came across a fragment of, I guess it was papyrus or something in an archive somewhere that was written in Latin. And I'll get it and I'll send it to both you guys, where it talks about Jesus being buried in Septimania. And I mean, so, yeah. So, I mean, we keep hearing these stories about Jesus being buried in the area that Jesus survived the crucifixion and came across, or they brought his body over, one of the two. And also that, Mary Magdalene is buried somewhere in the region. Now, there's been no proof of this, but I think it's interesting that fragment, which is very, very old, and I'm sorry I don't have the dating or the image because I hadn't thought of it in years, but it did refer to Jesus or Yeshua or, Jesu or whatever the term was at the time in Latin, being buried in Septimania, which of course was probably referring to that area. No, Septimania is kind of a different area today. They don't refer to the Rennes-le-Château area as Septimania anymore, but back then you're absolutely right, it was. Sorry, right. James, what were you?
Go ahead, James.
No, I was just going to say, because, there's a few things. I mean, Ravenna is an interesting place. When the Roman Empire collapsed in the west, of course, in the east, the area that we now know as Greece, Turkey, Egypt, continued for about 1,000 years. And we're looking really at about the 400 AD period for the Roman Empire falling in the west. Well, one tidbit that people tend to forget is that there was an attempt, relatively successfully actually, by the Emperor Justinian to reconquer the lost territories in the west. And of course, where you have Ravenna, there was what was known as the Exarchate of Ravenna. This became a central place for the reconquest of Rome, which occurred in the roughly the 530s, if my memory is right.
Right.
So
yes.
Ravenna really was the sort of spotlight and capital, actually, of the Western Empire for a period, and certainly capital of that reconquest of Rome. Now, if you consider that, you've got a east to west push. Who knows what was brought with the invading armies and then the new governors to that area? I mean, we call it the Byzantine Empire. I really don't like that, because if you went back in time and said, "Hi, are you Byzantine?" People would say, "What? No, we're Roman."
Right. Exactly.
But the reconquest of Spain too, and that's going on in this period. So there is still a lot of connectivity with trade, with different ports from the east and the west in this period. I just wanted to say another thing about Rennes-le-Château. and the area. Well, it is in this period that there is a lot of activity. You have really large, in fact, one of the largest Jewish populations outside of the Middle East, slap bang in the area of Redai, the Raz, as it was called, but extending from a place called Limoux right the way to Rennes-le-Château, Alet-Laban. Still to this day, you can see the evidence of a large Jewish ghetto, and of course, Limoux. Limoux has a synagogue for a period. And what's curious about Limoux is it's one of the traveling towns and cities of the area that were established somewhere else. And then when the Crusaders came into town, the people were forced out of those cities and had to resettle. One curious bit about Limoux, of course, is it was called the City on the Hill. So,
but it's not on a hill.
It's not on a hill anymore. But it
used the original one, right?
You've also got some interesting mountain peaks and passes. Col de l'Homme Mort, the pass of the dead man, singular, not plural. You have the fields of the dead man. You have all of this now. Is this a euphemism for something else? Is this a bit of a metaphor? Or is it reference to one person who died? And who was that?
Right.
Exactly.
Well, I covered a lot of the Ravenna connections in my book, The New Jerusalem of Ravenna and the Prophecy of Dante. And just, briefly, not to get too far astray from what you were saying, was that Ursus mentioned in the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, I can't remember his real name, but that was his code name in the priory and everything. What was mentioned in Dante. He's a character in the Divine Comedy, even. And Dante's tomb is in Ravenna, which is a copy of Virgil's tomb that's in Naples. And we all know Virgil is kind of one of the bases of the fascination with Arcadia, the theme of Arcadia later, in that he was viewed as kind of being like a Nostradamus kind of character, that they would use his works to perform bibliomancy, or to randomly open a page and then apply that passage to your life or the question that you had posed. But really, one of the most interesting things about Justinian I that Jay was talking about is his wife, the Augusta Theodora, who really you can look at as a Mary Magdalene kind of figure. And she was a very powerful woman who was born in Alexandria, Egypt. It said that she was a, quote, dancing girl. They apply the same kind of smears to her that been applied to Mary Magdalene. And if you look at her mosaic at Basilica San Vital, her and her retinue are depicted wearing Coptic tunic patches, which is a form of Egyptian Christianity that's a little bit more mystical and has different views than even the Eastern Orthodox Church was. And even the, quote, Gospel of Mary Magdalene was found in Egypt, right? So that she may have even had these beliefs. She was known to associate with, in the little Hagia Sophia, which was kind of the model for the larger basilica, with mystics and people with different Christian points of view, as well as having created a sect of nuns who were known for weaving. That we also things like the secrets in weaving applied to the stories of the Cathars later, in how that all relates to the Rennes-le-Château story and
so you're referring to, just so I'm clear on it, they would actually sort of embed images in their weaving that give information or symbolic or tell a story, or
patterns in it, in the weaving and everything,
like in some of the Renaissance paintings that we
people have pointed to, for instance, the watermarks of Cathars they used on paper, having secrets and different themes embedded in those. And also the quote weavers is a subject throughout different periods of history that people point to as hiding things. I think maybe even the sect of nuns that she created kind of morphed into the Order of St. Clare later in the 14th century. But also interesting in the mosaic of Empress Theodora's, she's holding the chalice in the mosaic, a golden chalice that even fits the assumption that she may have had these beliefs with regard to Mary Magdalene and even Christ, these alternate kind of beliefs that she practiced, above and beyond what the canon of the Eastern Church was.
Is it is it a chalice like a grail, or is it like an aguantarium?
It looks like a votive, communion chalice, but it's very large and it's jeweled. If you, Google mosaic of Empress Theodora in Basilica San Vital, you'll see that.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to have a look at that.
Very interesting, and there's lots of interesting things about the mosaics in San Vital. It also shows Christ Pantocrator in another mosaic, shaven and wearing Roman imperial purple robes and holding the 7 seals in his hand, sitting atop the cloak.
The Grand Roman. Roman.
So those kind of alternate views that are there in that, as Jay was pointing out, in the Eastern Orthodox canon or the Eastern Roman Church.
Jay, did you have something to add when I so rudely interrupted?
Yeah, it was just really to say that, again, when you have a look at there's a few problems with the Christ story. We did a show about calendars, so we know that his date of birth seems to have moved quite a bit around the year. But when you look at, we're talking about the Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire was this unified body that spanned from, Mesopotamia right the way through to northern Scotland, the Romans had a well-established bureaucracy. And what you would expect to see is, in that bureaucracy, some evidence of crucifixion. And in the time of Jesus, 30, 40 years before and after, there are no sources of crucifixion in that part of the world. So, there's a few problems with that. It could be that something's lost the time. I don't know. But for me, this seems to give a little bit more to actually, Jesus didn't get crucified in the end. There were a number of, curious links as well. So the other idea was this, the Pontius Pilate, the governor, who gives the choice, do we save Jesus Christ or do we save Barabbas? Well, let's break Barabbas down. Abbas, Son of God. So do you want to save the Son of God or do you want to save the Son of God? Well, we went with this one, not that one. There's a few quirks like that, and I think it does lend at least solid investigation and a little bit more towards evidence that actually, if there was historical Jesus, that maybe he wasn't crucified after all. Now, I would have been crucified for saying that just a couple of 100 years ago. But,
maybe even today.
Right, so what you're saying is maybe he was just exiled or something like that.
Well, this is it. I mean, the term Christ certainly wouldn't have been used, and probably the name Jesus not either. But it would be more common, in fact, for an exile. And if you had to choose somewhere with a similar culture, religious upbringing, language, etc., well, your choices are into perhaps Egypt, Ethiopia, or southern France.
Right. Even Rome had an early Jewish colony for business purposes too, that had been there among one of the earliest ones that's still there. That neighborhood's still there today. So southern France and parts of Spain, you're totally correct. Where even after 70 AD, when the Temple Mount was sacked, even more people came, or left that area due to persecution and came to the places you're talking about.
I should also add that, there is, and I'll correct what I've just said, there is a crucifixion that occurs, but the name escapes me. It's I would do it no service if I were to try and read it, but it most certainly isn't Yeshua, and it most certainly isn't Jesus, and in totally the wrong area, but within the province in which Jesus is meant to be there. So, we must also understand that the Mediterranean, a very large sea, is called essentially the Roman lake. There's a lot of trade and a lot of traffic going from key ports. So if someone is exiled, the other side of this, I'm just trying to give a little bit more to the, historical Jesus ended up perhaps in the south of France or somewhere maybe, is a deep understanding of Roman humor. The notion to the Romans of sending the King of the Jews to walk the streets with a sign that, INRI, Jesus, the Nazarene, King of the Jews, would have been quite funny to the Romans. Look what we've done to this king. Comparisons can be with Vercingetorix, for example, in one of the Celtic leaders from northern France, who's imprisoned for 12 years by Julius Caesar, just then to parade him, to execute him. They found that very funny. So it ties in with this idea that, all right, king, off you go, carrying some wood, something like that, you're attached to it. And maybe the symbology of that is where we get the notion of crucifixion. But in this period as well, most people, if they were crucified, there wasn't fine carpentry done to form a cross. At best, it would have been a T-shape, but usually it would just be a pole. And this is, again, so perhaps the imagery of seeing the alleged and so-called King of the Jews carrying a crucifix around is maybe where the legend begins. But either way, it's a symbol of torture. And, we should just remember those who were crucified, whether that's Jesus or not, because that is an agonizing death.
Absolutely.
Right.
But of course, there are a lot of questions around that very day. Normally they're, according to some sources, he was taken down from the cross the very same day. And normally they were left on the cross for like 6 days. Also, apparently, it was common practice to break the legs of those being crucified so that they couldn't support themselves anymore. And his legs were reportedly not broken.
That, I should say, was actually the Romans considered this a humane way of ending someone's life. The slashing of the tendons or breaking of the legs would trigger a heart attack within the person who was crucified. It was a quick death, in other words. Again, this is brutal, and you're crucified for treason, effectively, or desertion. This is a very extreme form of punishment. At the time, you would have thought something would have been written about this. We've executed essentially the King of the Jews and all of this, but there isn't anything contemporary. It comes later. That would fit better if you consider it with the exile, the idea that actually maybe his family went to another place. Because then the myths and the legend develop in the Middle East, but equally we have the same myths and legend in the south of France, where Jesus was here, he was there, and all of that.
Right.
So for me, there is at least some mileage in considering that this person may have ended up in the south of France, and for sure, people believed it.
Oh, absolutely. people still believe it there. Absolutely.
Right. The two different, even versions of it, the church story of her coming there and St. Baum being built and her relics supposedly being displayed there in the cave where she was a hermit. And then the alternate story that we're talking about, of her coming and having children, being associated with Sarah, the Egyptian girl, and the story of the three Marys and things like that lead to these alternate ideas that could be true. Absolutely. I mean, from a doubter's point of view, you could be cynical and say, oh, the Romans arranged all this as a form of skullduggery, that they wanted to dictate the path that Christianity took and the way it was used. But there's also a lot of rationale for the reasons we're talking about, in my opinion, too. So it's hard to absolutely prove things, like Jay was saying, what actually did happen so long ago when nobody wrote anything down about it. Even, the Gospels weren't written till later. And by that time, things had become political, with the Roman Empire eventually accepting the church. So it's kind of hard to figure out sometimes, and you have to be careful and really look into things and look at the facts that are there and the traditions and all of that. And I think it's definitely possibly true, that there's a lot of truth to that story of Mary Magdalene and possibly Christ too. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's our favorite obsession later. So
yeah, it would be nice if there wasn't such a stigma on looking into these matters, because even with the release of Bloodline, the documentary that we released a number of years ago, it was like, oh my gosh, we never said anything derogatory about Jesus. We were just exploring ideas, and I mean, the way I look at it, if you believe in God, then God gave you a brain. And so to me, the bigger sin would be not to use it. So it's like, I figure if there's a God, he, she, or it knows my heart and knows that I'm just trying to find out the truth. I'm just looking for truth. And, but a lot of people take extreme umbrage to any question whatsoever of the Christian doctrine. And I find that kind of sad and extremely limiting for people.
It gets political and even nationalistic.
Oh, very now, especially now.
At some points, those subjects, and people take them very seriously. And if you rock the boat, then you can become persona non grata.
Yeah, you're the enemy. You're the enemy. Absolutely. Right. But I mean, it's like, that's, I would think, what freedom is all about. I mean, I grew up obviously in the South, in the Bible Belt, church every Sunday and Sunday night and Wednesday nights. A lot of times we had prayer meeting on Wednesday nights. And, I had all that education and, studying the Bible, memorizing lots and lots of it and all that. And I still had questions. So I don't see anything wrong with seeking answers to your questions. Maybe you'll find out at the end of the day that, you were wrong in what you were thinking in those questions. But certainly, the curiosity is good, I think.
Absolutely.
And it didn't kill the cat.
It shouldn't either.
But anyway, so what were some other ideas that you came across in this second reading of Holy Blood, Holy Grail Court that struck you and said, oh my gosh, I didn't even notice that the first time around?
Right. Well, I was pleased to see, like, they mostly agreed with my analysis of the kind of genesis of the Arcadian theme, and even took it farther than I had, back to the tribe of Benjamin, and them relocating to the Arcadia region of Greece and everything. But one thing I really found when I was looking into it in the book, they keep stressing this relation to the Arcadian theme and Arcus's mother, Callisto. And I'm kind of preoccupied with all the geographic overtones of everything, because that's one way I started writing about this, by looking at places that used to be prime meridians or were used as observatories and things like that. So the mythology of Arcus is central to that, because as the myth goes, Callisto had been turned into a bear. And one day while out hunting, her own son sees her and is about to kill her with a bow and arrow. And Zeus, seeing this, stops that and casts both of them into the heavens, as with Callisto, the mother, being Ursa Major and Arcus is Ursa Minor. So in the tail of Ursa Minor is the pole star, and that orients us all to north. If you can find the pole star, that's the polar axis of the Earth. You can use it as a reference to compare your position on Earth with a little bit of technology. But that even the star in the landscape that Henry Lincoln speaks of or identified is probably representative of Arcus and the pole star. It's just adjacent to the Paris meridian that was established by the Cassini family, that also denotes the pole star. And the village of Arcs is right there, which in some regional dialects is even pronounced Arcus. So that's just one little minor thing. I've kept getting to these parts in the book in the second reading where they're talking about, that, and I'm like, oh, you're just so close to Arcus and the pole star, but they didn't get that.
They didn't go there.
Right. And I remember Henry Lincoln, not to take anything away from him, obviously, like in one of the first documentaries he did about it, he related the pentagram or the pentacle, to more dark arts and things like that. And to me, just through my studies, when you see the 5-pointed star, it doesn't always mean that. And if it's in the correct context, it's a reference to the pole star. And I believe that with the tomb from the Poussin painting, right, being just adjacent to the Paris meridian, right?
And you're talking about Shepherds of Arcadia.
The Shepherds of Arcadia painting. And, the tomb there that Lincoln tells us is very similar to the painting, and it is, the pictures we see, even though it's not there anymore. But if you follow the Paris meridian to Paris, it goes right through the Paris Observatory, and it goes north to the Louvre Museum, where the Shepherds of Arcadia painting is displayed right on the Paris meridian within the museum. And I believe that was intentionally done after the French Revolution, when they placed the painting in the museum, finally. And this kind of led me to this really bizarre discovery that links to the Da Vinci Code, right? At the conclusion of the movie, The Da Vinci Code, right, Professor Langdon figures out that Mary Magdalene is entombed beneath the inverted Iampe pyramid at the Louvre Museum. And they even show one of the brass Arago markers in the middle of the big square. Right. That's not actually there, but they show you this in the movie. And the orientation of that even matches the orientation of the whole Louvre and the two Iampe pyramids that are there. And so naturally, I plotted that on Google Earth. And to the west, it points right to Migdal, Israel, where Mary Magdalene was born. And then to the east, it points to Oak Island, Nova Scotia.
Oh, that's just crazy.
And they're showing you this in a movie. I'm not saying it's all true.
Right.
For instance, to begin with, it's weird that it points to Migdal, Israel. It creates an arc on the globe at that angle if you plot it, correctly on Google Earth. It does show you the arc, not just a straight line.
Right.
what a straight line is on a sphere or oblate spheroid. So when I figured that out, I was just kind of floored. I'm like, man, what's being told here? Is it true? Is it just a coincidence that this was all part of the plot of a book and then the movie? Or did somebody know something? So we can get a little conspiratorial here. It takes some leaps
Yeah.
of, clearly this is speculation. I'm not telling you that that's what happened, but if it's a coincidence, boy, that's a hell of a coincidence. And it is
That's
interesting that it all
interesting.
relates to Mary Magdalene and that it points that way. And you even look at the Louvre being the former residence of Catherine de Medici, and the Medici
Ooh.
family having this big value of the Arcadian theme and possibly believing they were part of the bloodline, via these Byzantine connections that I pointed out that most people don't consider those. They consider the other European connections with the
Mm.
Merovingians. But we see a real link to real royalty that could have, gone on and on throughout time with these marriages with the Eastern Empire rulers and their families, to the point where one of them was even named Emperor Arcadius, and several of the women were named Arcadia or Atalanta, which is another Arcadian mythological character. So
Mm.
it is interesting.
Yeah, we made a bit of a discovery, or someone did, as I was talking to James about, a couple things that you had mentioned to me in our messages yesterday about Ark and Arcus and this, that, and the other. He goes, "Oh my God!" And I said, "Why? What? And I thought, oh, he's going to disagree heavily with something. He goes, "Don't make a judgment. Hold on." And do we have that image,
We do.
Jay? Because Jay has been working on his genealogy. I don't know if you can see that, Court. It's hard for me to see.
A little hard, but Jay can describe it to us.
Yeah, Jay, what is that?
Yeah, as soon as I heard the name Ark, I thought, that's odd, because my ancestors were called the Lords of Ark.
Oh, interesting.
Just, like I say, on the meridian north of Paris. So, yeah, I thought that was very interesting.
Well, boom, I'm talking to you, Jay.
And I've tried turning water to wine. It doesn't work. But turn wine to water, though, that's another story. Yeah, I mean, the Byzantine element to this is something that's often overlooked. One of the key players, actually, in the during the period of the Crusades, is a relative unknown called Balian of Ibelin.
Right, I'm familiar with him, yes.
He's fascinating for me because he's the linchpin that connects all Eurasian royal families together. Through marriage to the Qing dynasty, and then later through his children, etc., to every royal household in Europe.
Right, those Genoese families are all linked, just like what you're saying.
Well, the Ibelins, a daughter of, I think it was Guy of Ibelin, married a Byzantine emperor. They were certainly very close, even with significant members of the Byzantine court. Again, don't ask me to go too far into that because I'll be just showing you a family tree. But it is a very interesting connection, and regrettably, with the Merovingians, their origins are somewhat obscure. There was another thing, Court, that I find the discussion about Arcturus, Ursus very intriguing, because there's a rich tradition of this stemming from ancient Greece right the way through. Because we talk about, I mean, go a bit left of center here, but we talk about the King Arthur. Now, the King Arthur of the Grail legend actually had been, the story around him had been around long before the sort of medieval idea. But really, my take on this is a title. Arthur corrupts from Arcturus, bear, basically. And this is a title. It's not King Arthur the name. This is saying literally Great Bear. And
Right.
of course, it's an honorific. We know people in history had this title. We can see it. They used to go by this name. So why would it be too unusual then to look at different periods in time, as you say, with Arxus and etc., and say that well, that's different, even though we know that plenty of other people did. It's just curious, and of course, I had to mention King Arthur. Because, of course, then you've got a connection to, again, a Grail or some sort of bloodline with him. Curiously, it was, well, I'm curious to see what you think, but there's certainly someone I believe who fits the bill of...
Oh, no, definitely. I agree. And I kind of neglected to include that in my book. I had enough trouble covering, all of the Greek associations, and then I even found associations in America and the story of Oak Island to the Philip Sidney's book, Arcadia, that describes a money pit with golden acorns in it, and even the supposed 90-foot stone found at the bottom of the money pit that relates to exactly what you're saying, that tradition of using that word as a representative clue or tip-off. And if we even look at the Priory of Zion, they were called Nautianeers at a certain level of initiation, or navigators.
Navigators, right.
Right. So some of these later associations based on the Paris Meridian, for instance, the Cassini family continually popped up in all different phases of that, period when their family, the four Cassinis, for like 100-year span, were all influential. And actually, if you think about the map of France that they drew, that's very accurate even by today's standards, that they would send these surveying crews out in the field, and these people would learn all of these local legends and folklore, and even be able to relate it to astronomy if that was there. So like the things of Henry Lincoln finding all of these shapes in the landscape with churches and things. You worked on things like that, right, Jay, or looked at some of those, that it could be related to the Cassinis having some kind of cloistered knowledge of all of this while they were even, doing their map of France and their other things they were involved in, like at Parios.
I have in my front room actually a copy of one of the departments from Cassini, and there's a notable omission, shall we say, in a curious place over in the Roussillon. There's it's almost as if for this little patch of land nothing was drawn, and it's near Perios.
Right.
Of course.
So it's interesting how Cassini, who was staying there for 18 months, just forgot to sort of colour a few churches in, but spent a lot of time, drawing churches in other places, just not the four that are in that area, or some of the castles, And I should also say that the area that is omitted is called Terre Salvaire, land of our Saviour. But it could just be that he didn't have time. Let's leave it to there. But again, we're coming back into the world of coincidence, aren't we? And
sure. I mean, even the Castle South Sierra there near Parios could actually be the Mont Sauvage, from Parsifal, or that instead of Montsegur, possibly. That's another good candidate for that place. And another interesting thing I found, the Cassini I was born in the Principality of Seborga, which was a Cistercian principality that a lot of people believe the Knights Templar even visited there. You know, the Cassini one was a Knight of Malta. He was the royal court astrologer, among being the astronomer, because that for a while those titles were interchangeable in history. So that from then on, his family seemed to have this interesting connection to a lot of these different, you know, quote unquote mysteries, landscape mysteries, and the Holy Grail, the Grail romances, and all of that. That they seem to actually reference these things in their lives, even to the point where the one of the Priory of Zion Grand Masters was referred to as Theirry, Theirry, and Cassini III owned the Chateau Thierry north of Paris, which in turn is directly north of Chateau Blanchefort at Rennes-le-Château, which is one of the tips of the star that Henry Lincoln identified. So there's odd, weird connections like that I couldn't find anything more about if I tried to follow the threads out. But just the use of that name as one of their estates was interesting in relation to the Priory of Zion.
Well, you know, I've just mentioned King Arthur. It's worth noting that Arcturus is, or Ursa Major, is one of the brightest, well, is the brightest star in the constellation of Boötis. And so what came with from Arcturus to into the Brittonic, so a Cumbrian language. Sorry if you're from Wales listening to this, I'm staking claim to it as a Cumbrian. But sorry to say it, Cimbrian, we're all really part of the same family. But that can that translation would be Arthur, be something along these lines. But that honorific of Great Bear could also very easily translate into Guardian of the Bear of the constellation, or Guardian of the Light, with it being the brightest star. So again, you can really see some of these, you know, the religious symbology beginning to tie in, and it wouldn't be the first guardian that we come across in this mystery. It's certainly one of the
also referred to as the shepherd of Arcadia, the shepherd of the Arcadian bears, because it's one of the circumpolar constellations and it chases the bears around. So some people do actually refer to Butes as the shepherd of Arcadia. I've seen that reference in a few books.
Again, when you look at the even the pentagram and this association with demonic things, actually, if we're being real about a few problems in the medieval and so-called Dark Ages, it is doctrinal from the Church that those followers of Christianity, there were schisms about this. The Synod of Whitby, for example, settled this dispute between Celtic and Roman Christianity, and that's the dating of Easter. Now, we can look on our calendars, we can have a look at our phones today, and it's quite easy for us to track where we are in the orbit around the sun. Back then, all castles, religious institutions had an observatory, not with a telescope, but to observe which particular days of the year that we're at. So I would invite listeners to, if you ever at the Cathedral Church of Chartres, go in through the main entrance and then hug the wall to the right. And the first bit of stained glass that you see as you hug the wall to the right and you continue, and then there's an alcove. Have a look at the window there. You'll notice there's a small hole in it. Have a look on the ground and you'll see a nail embedded within the stone. It's been there for hundreds of years. When the light shone through the small hole in the glass, it denoted the saint's day as celebrated at Chartres, whichever saint it was. The other thing just to mention on this procession is the word procession. The pentagram, if you were to draw it, it actually denotes the procession of Venus. which runs on a 5-year, it changes its position on a 5-year basis on an 8-year cycle. And if you were to plot that together, you'd find 5 points, 8 crosses, etc. And that symbology is something known by the Templars. You see it in the way that they used to build, and you see it across time too.
Interesting.
Oh.
I have heard of that before too, and that's one of the things I thought of when I keep seeing this reference to Arcus and the North Star. And, we talk to people like Dr. Hieronymus and other, symbolist scholars will tell you there's several different meanings for each symbol. And I think, the North Star is one of those, interpretations. Not that you're wrong or anything, but that's a very well accepted theory, the precession of Venus, or the way it forms a pentagram in its orbit in relation to us viewing it on Earth. So, no, I don't deny that at all. I just also point out that it could possibly be an Arcadian reference to the pole star. That's all.
It could very well be both. I mean, if you have a look at, for example, if you have a look at some of the stone circles that are found and some very strange buildings nearby, depending on where you are in the world, if you were to draw the heavens, the only shape you could make is a circle. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you're planning life from the harvest right the way through to day-to-day activity, when's winter coming, I think our ancestors paid so much more attention to the stars. And my last point before break is just, and what do we do for that? We flood it with street lighting, so we're completely cut off from what lies above.
Right. They weren't sitting at home in the evening looking at Facebook or watching TV.
And now it's time for our break. We'll be right back.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Scrolling all day, time can disappear. Wanna make it count? Why not volunteer?
Posting pics of your food, that takes up time. Time, you've got time to binge all of season 9, though it got so bad.
Time, you got time. We're gonna grow back and be the same browse you had.
Just a few hours to keep families from harm. Help us end home fires with Sound the Alarm.
Volunteer for a day to install free smoke alarms in your community.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected. Only at kgradb.com.
Welcome back to Night Vision. If you're just joining us, I'm your host, Renee Barnett. With me is James Martin, our night vision historian, and we are joined by author and researcher Court Lindahl from up in Northern California. I'm down in Southern California, and James is in Southern France, where I will be very, very soon. Very excited about getting back over and going on some treks. James has told me that he's found some things that I've not yet seen and that he wants to show me. So we'll try to do our best. And I haven't even mentioned this to you, James, so forgive me. But I think maybe when we're out on some of our expeditions, although it's going to be in an odd time for most Americans anyway, I think we should maybe go live on Facebook a couple of times and show exactly what we're looking at when we're looking at it. And I think that would be fun, and maybe even do a little live stream from the Jardin atop the hill at Rennes-le-Château, so that people can see what it looks like up there. And, I'm sure we can get a nice visual of the tower and other notable locations there in the village. So anyway, having said,
I was just going to say, I would recommend packing some heavy duty footwear, because there is a site that's full of symbols, and unfortunately nature's taking over. It's not going to be around for too much longer, but some very interesting glyphs. I
don't have room for my boots. Okay, I'll have to wear them over then, I guess. So, anyhow, something I was thinking of while you were both talking, and it's kind of just a little curious thing for me, is that Court, James has been doing a lot of work on genealogy, his own genealogy, mine, all our friends, anybody else who wants it. And also, if anyone is interested in having their genealogy looked into by James, you should send us an email at info@newrennies.org and set up a session with James for yourself, because it's amazing. I knew nothing at all about my ancestry, really. In fact, what I did know ended up being wrong. I thought I was Native American. I've been telling people my whole life that I was, and looking at my genealogy and my DNA, it just doesn't appear to be so, and I'm crushed. But having said that, I did find out lots of new things, some fun things about people in my ancestry, some witches and warlocks and things, necromancers and things like that, but also some royalty, and also some figures that actually are heavily involved in these mysteries that I've been looking into. So their names were very familiar to me. I had no idea that I was related. In fact, I kind of purposely didn't look into my genealogy, because I thought, there's not going to be anything there, and maybe it'll be boring. And so I didn't even think about doing it until, James, you delved into it. And not only did I find that I'm connected to a lot of historical figures that I've been very interested in, and locations, also have a lot of relations crossing over with James. So what I'm curious about, Court, I know you know a bit about your family tree, but do you think that there's anything, and I know this sounds a little out there, but in our cellular memory or in our DNA that has sort of sparked these interests just sort of naturally in us? And of course, when we find out that we do have family connections, it makes it even a little bit more interesting. But not that it's necessary. I'm saying I would still be interested in these same subjects, but it was just a surprise to me to find out how many connections that on both sides of my family there were. What about you, Court?
Right. Well, I was very lucky that my grandmother, who was originally Marjorie Sutherland, had done an extensive genealogy of that side of our family back in the 1960s and early 70s, that in checking into it with available what's available online, I found it to be very accurate. And her family came from Thurso Caithness in Scotland, and many relations to the Sinclair family, being the Earls of Caithness, and so on. That's very common there for those families to be related to each other. But what was also interesting is, in her memories of her grandfather that she hand wrote out in the genealogy, she mentions that my great grandfather, Robert Sutherland, was a big fan of the mysteries of Shakespeare and was into researching the pyramids and Egyptian culture, that he even had performed in the local Shakespeare troupe and everything at that time. That earlier him and his brother had been forced to wear kilts to school and got in a lot of fights because of that. And that their father, and this was in Iowa,
oh my gosh.
Right? So that they were taught specific dances and songs that they had to memorize and everything. And my grandmother was really proud of this. And I remember growing up, I only saw her periodically because my father was in the Air Force and she lived in Arizona. So we would only get to see her, at certain times. But she would always sit me down and tell me how special I was because I was Scottish. So her, national pride in all of that was kind of an inspiration later when I started to look into these things and become interested in them, that I appreciated the genealogy that she had made very much. Now, it's also interesting on my mother's side, she's a Bradbury, and her family came from England to Newfoundland, as far as they can tell, quote, before 1700. And I found in looking at some interesting historical events that I was related to a man named Thomas Bradbury, who was once the Lord Mayor of London and part of the Merchants Guilds there. And the Bradbury family had originated in Wickham, England. And I was even related to Mary Bradbury, who was the last person to be tried as a witch in Salem, Massachusetts.
That's
amazing. I thought that was kind of interesting too, because Wickham was originally known as Wicca, where the family had originated. I don't know if there's any connections to that, that way of thought or anything, but it's a coincidence that the
I bet.
And then she was the last accused and one of the only ones to be found innocent, because she was the wife of the governor at the time. So
she got off. Oh, that's great.
the people who went to Newfoundland.
She didn't get dunked.
Right. Went to the same Bradbury family. Some of them went to Newfoundland at that time, and that's my mother's family. And she actually grew up just a mile from where they actually landed, when they arrived in Newfoundland, and another branch went to Massachusetts at around the same time. So, yeah, those were some interesting family connections. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily feel that there's some kind of genetic, predisposition or transfer of things that we can't explain, but it's certainly possible. And
I just wonder. I'm just curious.
Right.
Yeah. I'm just kind of.
Some people take that too far. That idea. They
yeah, absolutely,
on something like that, and I just wouldn't go that far. I think it's very
no.
And
no, I wouldn't either. And I've often said the only really good thing in my mind, about finding that you're related or connected to, these famous historical figures is that you can actually get information on them. Whereas, if your relatives were workers or laborers, there's not going to be much written about them, if anything, maybe a census or something. But
only
other than that,
one. Right.
That's right. So you can actually get more information and better picture of what they were like.
Right. Well, no one's ever reincarnated from the garbage man, right?
Right. I was always Cleopatra in another life. Yeah.
Right. It's always somebody, a notable historical figure that.
Yeah.
But it's, when you're looking at your family background, I mean, that is the reality for a lot of people, which is, where you have workers. I mean, I describe it as the walls that you need to climb if you're wanting to go back in time. Well, that rhymed. The first wall is it is actually quite recent. I mean, if you're in Britain, the latest census is from 1921. So there are a lot of people who don't know even the grandparents. So it's very difficult to even get past that first block 100 years ago. But if you can get further back then to the beginnings of the census. But after that, well, there's some issues. If you're in a poor house or workhouse, then records are going to evaporate. But it is, I do think that it's important that, just trying to remember the people who were responsible, just as I suppose we are for today's society, but those who built the society that we've all prospered from or not today. Just to remember people who's passed. And I think when you find a historical character in your background, you take a little bit of ownership with it as well. And you read a little bit more and think, is that where a trait comes from? Is that where, I mean, Renee's forever resurrecting the dead. That necromancer.
Now I know where that came from.
Exactly.
It's a family tradition.
Well, think about it like this.
I don't like to brag.
We're talking about history in a way that is resurrecting the past, isn't it?
Yes,
Absolutely.
it is. Resurrecting the
And
dead.
you can get the same kind of feelings from that you were describing with identifying with somebody, that you might have an affinity for a certain character. Like I thought Empress Theodora was amazing, and some of the other people, Admiral Anson, that I've studied, that these people that you run across in their stories, like Edward Beale, that boy, their life stories would make a great movie. That I don't understand why.
Yes.
And Admiral Anson, in a way, that Master and Commander, that movie, is very similar to his exploits in his circumnavigation, but it's not necessarily about him or what happened. But that's an amazing story that he went through to accomplish that, with a lot of good and bad things going on. And then there's just, stories like Edward Beale, who's involved with the Beale treasure. I think he was a spy, like on the Wild Wild West TV show, more or less. He trucked around the country identifying resources and where gold mines were and things like this, and brought the first gold back from California to Congress to show them that ended up in California being made a state and things like that. So you do run across these people, in history, and at Rennes le Chateau or the Knights Templar, whoever it may be, that they just have these amazing stories, like the Ibelin family you were talking about earlier, the amazing story that kind of displays the difference between the Crusades being kind of a colonization effort, even, as opposed to this noble thing to take over the Holy Land for Christendom, that there were people who had an eye more on, this is ours now, and we're making a colony out of it. So it does expose things like that too. And the Ibelin family is really interesting in relation to things like the Sacro Christina, the Sacro Catino, that's what it's called, which is supposedly the serving platter from the Last Supper that the Genoese had, this before even the Knights Templar existed, that they were involved in all of those things in the Holy Land, and it displays how they were bringing back relics that they thought were associated with the Passion of Christ and other significant incidents in biblical and Christian history. So there.
Yeah. Now, I noticed, in knowing you as I do, James, I noticed when I started to ask Court about his background and what connections might or might not be involved in these mysteries, that the first family name he mentioned was Sutherland, and I saw your eyebrows go up. And so, what was that about? I mean, obviously, now is there? I'm trying to remember if there's Sutherland in either one of our families. Is that what it was that made your eyebrows raise?
It was, yeah, and they are prominent in the area known as Sutherland, literally the southland of the area of Caithness. Caithness is interesting because it's strongly believed the etymology behind Caithness means the area of the cats. But yeah, the Sutherlands familiar with as a family, and yes, I have seen both of those in both of ours. And the
cat is on their arms, the wildcat, and the motto is sans prayer, for no fear, without fear.
Wow.
And that goes with the story of when they first came, from the Low Countries, supposedly, prior to Vikings and all of that, there was a large population of wildcats there that they had to deal with. And that kind of led to all of that iconography and the association with wildcat.
Yeah. It's funny, my family comes partly, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother comes from the Calhoun clan. And I think the motto for the Calhoun clan is "If I Can," which is kind of interesting. I forgot what it is before the translation, but the translation is "If I can."
Then why not?
I guess, like, I'll do it if I can. Will you do this if I can? But I just thought it was kind of interesting and a little bit puzzling. But so basically, what you're saying is the three of us then are related here on this show.
Distantly, yeah, I suppose that's right. I've got to throw in my grandmas were Stewarts with a W, and Mellon, which eventually is just a corruption of Macmillan. So I've got to throw in Clan Macmillan's motto, which is Miseris Succurrere Disco, which means I learned to.
Let's go to the disco.
Yeah, basically. I learned to support the unfortunate.
All right.
And I think...
say that one more time.
It says, the translation is, I learned to succor the unfortunate.
I help unfortunate.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I think
that's
so.
A great one.
We try and assist the unfortunate, and given the charitable nature of the Clan Macmillan, the famous Macmillan charity in the UK, sort of ties in with that.
Absolutely.
But,
I think so, and as well as your work, and the things that you do, your work with the unions and all that to support workers, and it kind of makes sense. See, there is something to that, Court. It's in his very DNA. We won't go that far. But,
I don't doubt it. I just don't,
I don't know either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything's possible.
It's kind of a funny thing, an interesting thing to ponder. But anyhow, so yeah, it's amazing what you can find when you go back in time, and it's really fun and interesting when you find those crossovers with people that and it's just kind of interesting, and it does kind of make you question whether or not, did I run into this person by sheer accident, or maybe I ran into them by accident, but the fact that we sort of clicked or whatever, maybe there's something more to that than meets the eye. I don't know. But anyhow, so back to you, Court, on Holy Blood.
Right.
What was the... Yeah, go ahead.
It's okay. Well, one thing I always noticed, I've looked into the phenomena, quote unquote, called the Cremona document, like in the work of Zena Halpern as it applies to Oak Island. And in reading
Dear
Holy Blood.
Alcina.
Yeah, rest in peace.
God rest her soul.
That, the Priory of Zion and the overtones in the Cremona document all relate to more modern political movements in the way they were kind of resurrected, that these stories do have like some legitimacy to them, that they did mean something before, as in a lost treasure that could have been associated with a group of people like Merovingians or Dagobert II that now wouldn't be desirable in certain quarters to believe or talk about. That how these were adapted in later history in the late 19th century and early 20th century to kind of bolster these political movements, like the Cremona document could be related to the struggle in Northern Ireland and the Jacobite movement. And we see the Rennes-le-Château story kind of being related later to kind of a conservative Catholic movement to reinstate a monarchy in France, which had always been a political football over a wide span of time, even after the French Revolution. So I found that interesting in the way they adapted these folklore stories or stories of real treasure being hidden in Septimania or the treasury of Dagobert, and then related them to these modern political movements where I would find characters like Auguste Laboisse Roquefort, who wrote the book Voyage à Rennes-les-Bains, discussing the story of the devil guarding a treasure on Mount Blanchefort in 1832, kind of long before the whole Father Saunière portion of the story got going. And I found that he had, in another one of his books, Eleanor, he writes a eulogy to his friend Pierre Hubert Anson. And he goes on to claim in the elegy that Pierre Hubert Anson is a member of the Anson family of Shugborough Hall in England. And we see even in Holy Blood, Holy Grail, in the brief part where they're talking about Shugborough Hall and the Shepherd's Monument and the imagery from Poussin's Shepherds of Arcadia on the Shepherd's Monument there is even more bizarre in light of Roquefort's claim that his French friend, who coincidentally worked for the Department of the Ministry of what's the I'm losing the word, the department that deals with all the money. The Ministry of Finance, that he was persecuted at the time of the revolution and was said to hide out in southern France somewhere, as described by Roquefort in his elegy of his friend in the book. And in other sources, Roquefort is listed as being a member of the Academy of Arcadia of the Vatican, which I thought was interesting. And on the flyleaf of still another one of his book, it just says et in Arcadia ego with no explanation.
Oh, wow.
Why that's there. So all of those things combined points to me to kind of this underground organization possibly dedicated to preserving a monarchy in France, having something to do with the story of Rennes-le-Château. And sure as heck later in the Saunière era, those kind of ideas and themes pop up again in the form of Maria Theresa of Austria Este donating money, or him having bank slips of hers, and the Habsburg Count visiting Rennes-le-Château and things like that, that them attaching themselves to these older stories could be part of a more modern movement to attain their goals. Now, for what real reason, I can't figure. Just associating themselves with Merovingian rulers of France is one of the rationales in Holy Blood, Holy Grail, that part of like what Pierre Pontard was up to was reestablishing a Merovingian king again, as part of the
surely nobody really thinks that that's going to happen now.
No, and maybe he did it just to draw attention to the whole thing and show all the connections, and educate people to this kind of hidden stream. They even refer to Arcadia as a hidden stream of information from the river Alpheus in Arcadia is considered to be the hidden stream in mythology. So overtones like that, are implied too, where you have to know the mythology of Arcus and Arcadia to even begin to understand the story in some ways, or other myths and legends too, like Jay talks about, or a lot of other people bring up in relation to what's going on there. So I saw kind of the same pattern in the Cremona document too, that there's a story, an original story to it, and later it was applied to a political movements.
Right. Just to be clear, so you're saying that you think the Cremona document is authentic, but misinterpreted. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I think some of the information included in it was unknown previously and could be real, but it was kind of twisted into a way to promote or hide the activities of Jacobites, or having to do with the conflict in Northern Ireland at the time, because there's continually the name MacDonald pops up again and again. The original story of the prisoners being, writing a journal in code and everything was they were in prison for something that they had done in Ireland that is unknown. And then you have the arms dealer, Francis Bannerman, in America, married to an Irish woman, being a staunch Jacobite, even including a stone from the Glencoe massacre in the wall of his home as a memorial. Kind of tips you off that he had Jacobite sensibilities. That, part of the story is them going to Africa to get diamonds in a ship. And Francis Bannerman was a relic and arms dealer. He both dealt in the world of relic collectors, which would expose him to a lot of these stories and a lot of the mysteries, so to speak. But he was also known to even buy and sell armed surplus Navy ships with cannons on them and everything like that. He sold to Argentina and other South American countries at various times in the early 20th century. So there's one part of the Cremona document where they go on a ship to Africa, to a region that is known for diamond mining. And that could have just been some scheme to raise money for a political movement, in part, where they referenced all of these older stories to kind of even taunt the Vatican. You can see in that story that the Vatican ends up buying the Cremona document. They're the ones who own the original one. Everything else we see on TV about that is from copies of it and people theorizing what it means. That I think they're taking an allegory and metaphor and trying to make reality out of it in suggestions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To America and things like that are complementary to Masonic ideals as well, more modern Masonic ideals. And my studies with regard to the Knights Templar reveals kind of a war between continental Freemasonry and English Freemasonry as to their relations to the actual order of the Knights Templar as well. And that created a lot of propaganda and kind of falsehoods and different stories that were told in order to accomplish that. You can definitely see, if you compare the way English Freemasonry adapted the imagery of the Knights Templar and the way continental Freemasons did that, who were incidentally created by the Stuart family, who created continental Freemasonry in a very big way. That the oration of Chevalier Ramsay, for instance, where he was the first to suppose there was even a connection between the military orders and Masons. Before that, it wasn't even a factor considered. And Ramsay also developed all the higher degrees before English Freemasons did. That include things like the Royal Arch of Enoch, where they reenact the story of Enoch coming through the 9-layered chamber and finding the golden delta at the bottom in parchments and everything that are repeated again in the design of the money pit on Oak Island, having 13 layers like the Royal Arches of Enoch, with the supposed treasure and stone at the bottom. So all of these things became kind of like a political football. We see that the Stuarts basically, if you ever want an example of a quote shadow government, there it is. They operated just as if they were still kings with no physical domain anymore, and they had an extensive network of spies and financiers and ways they would obtain money in the works. So there's a lot of truth to that.
It's almost like you talk about a shadow group. It's almost like there's what's apparent in the world, and there's this other layer of stuff that only certain people are privy to, and then those who want to put in the time to do the research and sort of gain access to some of those ideas and imagery and information. So it almost seems like there's a world that everyone can see, but there's this whole other thing going on underneath, and possibly that includes people that are either hanging on to power, are in power, or people who want to gain power. So it's almost like a game that the rest of us poor saps aren't able to play.
Right.
But
internet.
Yeah.
Right.
It has. It really has, especially with archives available. Yeah.
Right. I'm sure, Jay, when you're doing your genealogy, the ease you can just look things up is like a lot different than having to go to the library or interview actual family members and everything is one example, much less looking into something like the Stuarts and the Jacobites and the way they affected everything that you can just, it's at your fingertips now instead.
I have to say, one half of my family, that's certainly true. The other half, it's quite a long paper roll. It's curious. I mean, there were a few things that you just mentioned, Court. I mean, just for those listening, just before we came onto the air, we were talking about a place in Scotland, in a very remote part of Scotland, absolutely beautiful, called Argyll. And in Argyll, there is what I would describe as not a church built by the Templars, but certainly containing some Templar iconography. And there is a nearby castle called Castle Sween, which was owned by the MacDonald family. Now, the Stuarts, it's interesting with the European Stuarts and the term shadow government, because, of course, in the Stuart family, it's referred to as pretenders to the throne.
Right.
And you have James II, who's deposed from power in 1688, who is replaced by William and Mary, William of Orange. There are Dutch troops who invade Britain. This myth that Britain hasn't been invaded, well, we didn't call it an invasion in Britain. We called it the Glorious Revolution because, Britain.
It was a good one, right?
But there were Dutch troops on the streets and a Dutch monarch there. But, of course, James II...
Are you sure they didn't call it a special military operation?
We can't call it a war. But it's really interesting that, of course, the Stuart family from there on in, from 1688, are useful puppets for a short time of the French government. This idea that we can replace the throne of Britain with James II again, but then his son. Now, they really did do quite a number. They attempted this. And this is where you have the Bonnie Prince Charlie, you have James III Stuart, you have all of this, and they do, well, invade or reoccupy Scotland and attempt to take back their throne. Now, in order to do that, the question is, of course, well, where did the money come from? And then you see, well, actually, it's the French government or the French monarchy themselves. But just prior to all of this, when you have the Stuarts on the throne of Great Britain, and then prior to that of Scotland, it's worthwhile noting, I suppose, one of the more famous Stuarts, Mary Queen of Scots.
Right. She was the origins of the whole clan there, the whole Stuart movement on the throne. Exactly.
Well, you've got, I mean, what's curious with this is just before that, I mean, it's interesting you're referencing the Grand Orient and Compagnonnage in terms of European masonry. But this legacy from the Templars continues. I'm in the middle of writing a book about what happened to the Templars. It's called Out of Order, the downfall of the Knights Templar, what happened to them afterwards. And in France, the order is resumed. It just changes its name. The Garde Écossaise, the Scotch Guard.
Right. Yes.
And for quite some time, the usual Templar families from Scotland are there defending the French royal family until Mary Queen of Scots. The idea being that you have Scottish troops who are independent defending the French monarchy. But of course, Mary Queen of Scots grew up in France and was relatives to various contenders to the French throne at the time. She brought everything into disrepute. The Scots Guard becomes a thing of the past. Now, just a last point on this. When we talk about shadow governments or pretenders, why we tend to assume that only refers to people in power, when actual, history tells us that this happens to groups, this happens to organizations that have been disbanded. There are pretenders to that organization that rise straight away. Legitimized in Portugal as the Order of Christ. It was a name change and that's it, to various other orders that we see throughout time. So secret government, special interests, power play, all of this, it doesn't just stop when an order is killed off. In fact, it's like the Hydra, lots of heads grow up.
Right. As I pointed out just a minute ago, Maria Theresa of Austria-Este, who had a sad, relationship to Father Saunier, or bank deposit slips of hers were found. She was a pretender to the Jacobite throne. She was one of the people that was considered at that time to be in line for that. So even she had the blood to the Stuarts that makes that connection to her, which is also interesting. And another interesting character I found was the bastard son of James II, James Fitzjames, who went to Spain. And his family eventually, they became the Dukes of Alba, who owned the Chateau Tourbillon in Zion, Switzerland.
Oh my God.
Chateau Vortex basically would be one translation of that name. But his descendant also married one of the remaining descendants of Christopher Columbus, whose family owns some of Columbus's papers. And there was actually a legal court battle in Spain over whether the state could seize these documents or the family could continue to own them recently. So their influence, you're right, it's just like a spider web of all of their relations. They're closely related to the De La Tour family as well, even earlier in history through the two Dukes of Albany, who both married father and son John and Alexander, who both married women named Anne de la Tour. And then when I looked into their genealogy, they had a descendant about the time of Saint Germain who claimed to be descendant of the Egyptian princess Bel Mori. In her genealogy, she outright states this as being true, which kind of connects us to the imagery of Sarah, the Egyptian girl, and the Mary Magdalene theories all over again via that family. And the De La Tours are kind of a subset of the Lusignan family, too, which is one of the families associated with the folklore of Melusine and the Merovingians as well. So there's a lot of these connections in there, as the story is just this endless web of influence, and you can begin to see how they were able to enact all of this political power, even though they no longer had a country, because they were related to everybody.
And the Lusignan families, much more recently, do have ancestors, in that family. I mean, last week on the show, we were talking about the political nature of the Rennes-le-Château mystery, and the idea of there being monarchists, very pro-monarchists in the priests, and of course the natural relationship between monarchy and religion, and certainly in Europe. But there was something that I touched on which just expands slightly, which was this notion that in the so-called Victorian period, you've got it's almost like a royal competition between the royal heads, most of them related to each other, to try and prove that they're descended from the House of David, or how they can out-royal each other. Mm-hmm. And this really is absolutely key to, I think, some of the finds that we might refer to, but also some of the obfuscation of history, some of the myths. It becomes very murky and all of this.
Right, I don't know what you think. Too. I got a great one for you right there in Prince Edward, the father of Queen Victoria, right? He lived in Halifax when the money pit on Oak Island was discovered. And I had previously found all of these connections to the Arcadian theme and the story in Philip Sidney's book. And by the way, the Stuarts had an unusual appreciation for that book. There's several instances of it coming up in their family history. So even Prince Edward and Queen Victoria are related to the Stuarts via Elizabeth of Bavaria, sister of Charles I, who Prince Edward's personal assistant was a man named Sir George Anson from the same family of Shugborough Hall. And so when I found that out, if you think about the Shepherd's Monument, all of this value of this Arcadian imagery as associated, that's just like, boy, he was probably involved in the Oak Island story somehow, no matter what you think of the truth or of that or not. And I found this by watching the TV show Victoria. One of the episodes is called In Arcadia. One of the characters in the show is Sir George Anson, and you look it all up, and it's true. It's amazing the connections of the web, as you call it, of these people.
You've tempted me, Court, to talk about Shugborough, because we've got to mention. I mean, having been, it was about an hour away at one point from where we used to live, if that, the what's called the Folly in England. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but
Sure.
Basically what we're referring to, the Shepherds of Arcadia. It's really interesting. Actually, what I found when I was there was the connection to Shakespeare, but not just Shakespeare. The idea that Shakespeare actually didn't exist. And of course, then Rosicrucianism, and some of the proposed alternatives, Francis Bacon, and it's actually looking around Shugborough Hall that you can actually see some of the documents that they have there, and some very interesting symbology that might even lead into that. I don't know what your thoughts are on Shakespeare and how this might tie in.
Oh yeah, it all ties in. In fact, I was talking about Philip Sidney before. His sister was Mary Sidney Herbert, the Countess of Pembroke, and their mother was the sister of Sir Robert Dudley. So if you look at that conspiracy theory that Queen Elizabeth and Sir Robert Dudley were the parents of Sir Francis Bacon, as a lot of people believe or espouse, that would have made Philip Sidney his first cousin. And then Mary Sidney Herbert's sons, Philip Herbert and William Herbert, are the subjects of the dedication of the first folio written by Ben Jonson. It's also suggested that they were involved in funding it. So all these, mysteries and things, if you look at them, there are points of view out there that the Herbert brothers involved themselves in the first folio to actually cover up the fact that Edward de Vere was involved in this, because Philip Herbert was married to his daughter. It's this complete web of, literature even involved in the way these people identify with the world and things, plot elements that they value as meaning something to them, even to the point where, for instance, Charles I's last words were from Philip Sidney's book, Arcadia, Pamela's Prayer, and that Philip Herbert was one of his attendants while he was imprisoned, along with his cousin Thomas Herbert, who ended up owning the king's copy of Shakespeare. I believe he owned a copy of the, quote, second folio at that time. And Thomas Herbert even married into the family of William Alexander, the Baron of Nova Scotia, who later amended Sidney's book Arcadia with a new chapter. And so this is all I learned.
Court, remind me what was the content? You don't have to recite the whole thing, but just the general idea of Pamela's prayer. What sticks out about that in those being his last words?
Sure. Part of the reason he was being persecuted was due to his wife's Catholic faith. Queen Henrietta Maria was the daughter of Marie de Medici. And there you have a straight route to the whole Arcadian Academy of Arcadia, the way the de Medicis valued it and the church valued it, and Poussin and all those kinds of associations. So Pamela's prayer is kind of a plea for Miss Pamela when she's being persecuted, that in part because of her brand of pagan faith, as it's stated in the book, that everybody should be treated fairly under the law, that it was kind of a plea for religious tolerance. And that was one of the issues in Charles I's execution and persecution in the first place. So that may be why he chose to quote Pamela's prayer just before he was beheaded.
Wow.
So all of those connections were weird when you consider that the story of the money pit in Philip Sidney's book
I just wanted to make
Oak Island.
I just wanted to make a quick observation as well with Rosicrucianism, which is when you look at it through the lens that you've just presented. I've always, I haven't discussed this publicly or anything. I have mentioned it to Renee a few times, but it remains my solid view that the origins of Rosicrucianism is in fact a when I'm going to use the word cult, I don't mean it with its modern connotations, but a
like a mystery
worship cult. A worship cult, mystery cult of Elizabeth. The connection with the House of Tudor to the Rose. We call one civil war in England the Wars of the Roses, battle between the Lancastrians, who are from the right side of the Pennines, just for anyone in Yorkshire who's listening, and versus the House of York, who have the White Rose. And
or on the wrong side of the Pennines.
Obviously they know that. But the fusion of the two roses with Henry VII and I think it's Margaret of York, fusing both sides together. The rose is associated, not really at the time, but certainly with Elizabeth, who You find rows star chambers in bedrooms across the country with roses carved within the ceiling. You see this worship of Gloriana of Elizabeth. And it just strikes me that, certainly what Rosicrucianism becomes is, a debate and all of this, but perhaps its origins might actually be within the cult. And if you think about it like that, it's essentially a mystery cult of, again, another bloodline, isn't it? With the Tudors desperately trying to prove that they were legitimate, which is somewhat shaky, I have to say. But it just sort of tie in with what you've just alluded to in terms of what would then later happen to their relatives in Charles I.
Right. So in response, the Stuarts developed something similar, to safeguard their values or to secretly communicate in some cases via themes in artwork and literature that may indicate there's more there, to the initiate, so to speak. And you're right. If you look at even what happened to Sir Francis Bacon in his life, that he ended in disgrace pretty much, that was a function of, the Jacobean era, James I beginning, and the kind of regime of Elizabeth eventually kind of losing influence to the degree that they had before, but still attempting to maintain it via Sir Francis Walsingham and some of the other people he was associated with that continued their influence on into the reign of James I.
The various spy masters, and when I've spoke about the reason I'm not convinced that Guy Fawkes or some of the plots were in fact as they have been recorded in history, I suppose, I'd have to say this, but perhaps some of these mystery cults are in fact labour unions or trade unions for monarchies.
Right, and you do have very powerful trade unions and the merchants of London and those kind of organizations at the time that did have a lot of big money reasons for things to go the way they would want them to. I agree totally. And that's just one example, much less other parts of the economy as well.
I mean, you have the guilds, the London guilds. Most cities had some guild. Not there were many cities in England in the medieval period, but certainly it is accepted history, I should say, that those guilds either merged with or established, I would prefer merged with, the Masonic movement.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Again, down very protectionist sort of ideas, protecting, knowledge of a trade, I suppose, which would lead to the origin of the trade union movement, I suppose. We, in the Labour Union, I should say for US listeners, we do trace our history back to those medieval guilds as well. But that protection of trade, the other way of saying that is protection of knowledge. And so you can see that thread over time, even at Rosslyn, where you have the stonemasons and you have, this idea that you protect knowledge and carving and all of this. It shouldn't be anything that's strange or, somehow this is some alternative history or fringe history. No, it's history, I think you'll find. And
it's left there so too because of the shifting sands of the political landscape. In case it's erased or officially not taught or whatever, there's still something there you can go to that is somewhat of a mystery if you don't know anything about it, but it does tell you real things. There's no doubt about that. And time after time in European cathedrals and even back to Egyptian architecture and things like that, there's truth told in a lot of those things, probably for that reason,
And I just want to sew that idea up as well about this sacred knowledge. For most of history, certainly the last 1,500 years with the collapse of the Roman Empire, knowledge has been something exclusively for the wealthy and powerful and the clergy. And so the idea of tapping into a sacred knowledge can be looked at in another way, which is to stop ordinary people from accessing the secret. Because if to do so would remove the power and would remove essentially some of the potency of what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
But just to sew it up for me, when you mentioned the internet before and how difficult it's been to get a book on the shelf, if you don't know how to read, pointless. But today we have access to the internet and a vast library at our fingertips. And perhaps now we're beginning to decode the past.
Right.
I certainly hope so. We're coming up right at the end of the show. And before we get there, which is just about 1 minute away or less, Kurt, can you tell us how people can reach you, how people can access your books and that sort of thing?
Sure, you can just word search Court Lindahl books, and that'll lead you to a page that has all of my titles. I'm up to 10 books now, which is hard to...
Court Lindahl, and that's Lindahl, as you can see it on the screen. Court,
and you can get me on Facebook if you would like to chat about something or contact me for anything, and you can always also word search Court Lindahl blog, and a lot of portions of my books are free there, and I have a video page. I make a lot of videos on the Court Lindahl channel on YouTube as well about a lot of the things we've been discussing here today. So,
well, thanks so much for coming on with us today. I really enjoyed it. I knew I was going to. And of course, if you want to reach James or I, you can email us at info@newrennies.org. Also, we're both on Facebook, but that's probably the most efficient way to get hold of us. If you have questions, if you have suggestions for future shows, or anything like that, please reach out. Or if you want to look into your own genealogy, you'll be surprised at how little it will cost. And you can also help support Night Vision that way. So thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We love you guys. Take care. Have a great week.
See you all later.
Bye.
Good chatting with both of you. I appreciate it. Thank you.